So I'm excited to share some lessons I've learned, some insights I've had in dialogue. And I did bring you, or rather, I probably brought the slides more for myself, because as I was kind of constructing this and reflecting on these wonderful conversations that I'm privileged to have with some amazing people who all in one way or another think about transformation, I've come up with a lot that I could share. So let's see how far we get through this list, and hopefully you can take away a few things. All right, so let's bring this up. Brilliant. I'm assuming you can all see this. If not, do let me know. So lessons learned in dialogue. I really like to be in dialogue, because as I am probably preaching to the choir here, as we are in conversations, we learn, right? So first of all, I put the number 42 up here. Those who know me will probably have some context for this. But really, the reason that it is there is because I was thinking about transformation. And I was thinking about all of these different ideas and frameworks and perceptions and theories on transformation and what that means. 42 is a number that made famous by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And one of my favorite theories of how the number came about, it stands in the story. It stands for the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. That's what a computer generates as an answer to that question. So my favorite theory around that is that 42 in a computer language called ASCII stands for an asterisk that you would use for whatever you want it to be. So I thought that was brilliant. Turns out not to be true, but still absolutely brilliant. So I'm having that there because it seems to me that when you talk about transformation, you ask 100 coaches what transformation is, or what transformative coaching is, what transformational coaching is, you tend to get 100 different answers. So I put that up there in the beginning because it's really quite an elusive and still building term. So as an academic, I've coached for a long time. I've ran a master's program in coaching. I've done a few master's programs that are connected to coaching. I like theory. I like things to be really grounded. I like coaching to be evidence-based. But then there's so much more than what the science to coaching. And especially when it comes to transformation, we're not here to tell anybody that, oh, you're doing transformative coaching wrong. This is really about helping coaches think about, what do you mean by transformation? What do you mean by transformative coaching or transformational coaching? So that's up front. That's kind of one of the lessons I've learned. The next thing I wanted to say is that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, as the saying goes. There are so many fantastic people that have been thinking about transformation, about theory of change. You've heard Simon Weston this morning talk about forming and reforming. There's psychoanalytic perspectives on it. There's so many perspectives on what transformation entails and how it could be best facilitated. I add, if we choose to, because there's many coaches who are not necessarily studying or researching or even engaging with what other people have to say about transformation. They're just doing their own thing. And that's okay too, right? But there is a wealth of thinking and theory and frameworks that we can tap into, that we can engage with, that we can have a dialogue with. When you're reading a book, you can engage in some form of dialogue, not necessarily that the author responds to you, but actually you'd be surprised at, authors responding to you, but that's on the side. So there are a lot of giants out there who have been talking about that. So we could choose to climb on their shoulders. And I found it incredibly valuable whenever I did. And I got the chance to do that. So I'm in deep gratitude to Animas and to Nick for asking me to take over the podcast hosting, because I get to talk to all of these amazing people. And this is just a selection. So my insights, as I mentioned, are somewhat based, certainly inspired by many of these conversations. And there is a wealth of follow-up material if any of you wanted to follow that up. So I'll put some of those giants out there and leave it up to you what you want to do with that. But that's kind of the source of where I'm speaking from, paired with 12 years of coaching now. So it's a concept in flux, right? It's constructed construct. It's something that changes with time. When we think about transformation, Simon had alluded to this being a term that only really in the modern age came of much mention. I really liked the Ngram search and the graph that he's shown. I played around with it a little bit earlier. That was quite fun. But certainly, it's an evolving concept. So as one of those lessons, I think that's an important one to acknowledge, that it's not that we figure out what transformation is once and then it kind of stays like that. It is quite important for coaches that we keep engaging with what we know. We keep questioning what we think we know. We keep engaging with other people. We keep engaging with our clients, but also with colleagues, but also with perhaps teachers or mentors about what does transformation mean and how do we facilitate it. I was tempted to start offering you some of those perspectives. Kurt Levin's theory of change. I'll mention briefly what Nick's recently come up with, just because it's been part of one of those conversations that we've had on the podcast. But there's just so much that it would definitely go way beyond the scope of what I'm trying to do here. But what I wanted to say and make clear is there's a lot out there. So if you're serious about transformative coaching and you are someone who appreciates what those people have talked about, and you appreciate learning through engagement with people who sometimes have spent their whole life thinking about what transformation means and how we might bring it about. There's a lot out there. And I think it's good that we continue to evolve our perspectives. So I like to say that we're always in the process of becoming. It's quite an existential thing to say, perhaps, but it's a statement that comes in many forms, right? Change is inevitable. Forming a process of forming and reforming who we are as people, what our paradigms are. I've yet to meet a person that didn't change. And by change, we talk about that a little bit more as we're going through the next couple of slides. It's not a small change in behavior when we talk about transformation here. When this forming and reforming, it's a shift in paradigm. It's when people change and transform, something major, something significant seems to shift. So I really like that analytic perspective that, well, we're forming as people, and then there is a certain path or there's a certain way that we are, and we can reform or transform, right? So we somehow shift where our path goes. We shift some of our paradigms. And that's what I mean when I say we're always in the process of becoming. So I've seen clients, and I'm sure many of people have seen clients who've been holding on to staying the person that they have become, because there's a comfort there. That's something we know. It's something they've worked hard on, perhaps, to become that person. And of course, we would like to hold on to something that we've worked hard on. But times are changing, cultures are changing, politics are changing, the people around us are changing. And there come a time when it's just no longer serving us. So there is a need to reform, to transform, to shift, to change. And unfortunately, a lot of people wait until there's a pain point. And I always liked to appreciate that we're always in that process and to embrace that process, even if it comes with some anxiety. If it's not necessarily comfortable to shift, to question ourselves, to reform. forming something else or into a different direction away from what we have become to know comes with some anxiety, some discomfort. So I absolutely understand why someone would not want to do that. But it's an inevitability, I believe, in life. And that's certainly something that that came across in a lot of these conversations that I've been having. Now, I've said a few things about this already. So forming versus transformation, right? So it occurred to me that first we form as people. I mean, I have a 8-month-old daughter, so she's forming at the moment, but also there's a constant transforming. So it's at the first I thought, well, that we need to be formed to some extent in order to be able to transform, right? We need some sort of form in order to shift to a different form. But it really depends on how we look at what form means. So form happens immediately if we take a block of warm clay and we do literally whatever with it. We just grab it and then there's a form. So form doesn't mean that we have worked on this piece of clay for some time and then it reached a certain quality of form or a certain shape that, you know, we judge to be complete in some way, and then it needs to be changed. But there is a particular forming. Anything will already be a form, right? And so then we can shift this. So now, how is this different to change, right? Everybody changes all the time. And I had alluded to that a little bit already, is that there seems to be this qualitative difference of transformation being a change that is more significant than a behavior change, for example. Because I can change my behavior tomorrow, and many of you have seen that in their coaching, a client changing a behavior, but then they fall back into old patterns. Right? Not falling back into old patterns. That's when transformation takes place. Because we don't have to force ourselves to change the behavior. The behavior is a result of this new form that we have acquired. So that was an important distinction, I think. It's that, yes, everybody changes all the time, but transformation has a different quality to it. So then we have that discussion about transformational versus transformative, and that's particularly something that came across in the conversation I've had with Nick when he was on the podcast. Is that transformational seems to be this whatever you want it to be, and Nick mentioned that transformative he had chosen based on Jack Masarov's transformative learning theory, which is one of those theories of change and transformation that is really grounded in a lot of substance. So that felt very important to set transformational coaching aside, or the coaching that we teach here at Animas, aside from some of the transformational approaches that are out there that might not care so much about theory that is grounded in, or, you know, shoulders of giants that it's standing on. So again, it's not that we can claim that this is transformational and this is transformative. Still, everybody puts their own name on these things. But when you think about your coaching as transformative or transformational, or whatever other name you might give your coaching, then there's an invitation to think about, well, what do I mean by that? And what's the kind of framework that I have for my work? And I know from experience, there's a lot of coaches out there who just work very intuitively. And they're not really that interested in, you know, doing a lot of reading or researching a lot of theory. They just intuitively know what to do in the space. Now, I know that often offers tremendous value, but I also know that when a coach engages in thinking, in reflecting, in questioning, what am I doing here? And what is this related to? What are my influences? Who have I learned from? Who has inspired me to do things in a certain way? Every coach that I've worked with has influenced the way that I coach in some way or another. You know, there's so many important teachers and mentors I've had in my life. There's so many people that influence your coaching style. So I'd really encourage everybody to look at that. The people that I've talked to, they've kept referencing people in their life, scholars that they have learned from, people that they've met, peers that they've been in dialogue with, that really shaped their approach over the years. And what I've noticed is that once somebody's engaged in that kind of process, then through that journey, a really solid foundation is established. A solid foundation that's ideally open enough to allow it to continue to become and continue to evolve, but solid enough to give you a good grounding, right? And when we coach from that kind of grounding, from that kind of having thought about what transformation means to me, what other influences might have helped me to arrive at where I am right now, from which to go forward, then we show up differently with our clients, right? There's a confidence that is created through having gone through that kind of journey and allowing other people, allowing ourselves, allowing supervisors or teachers or mentors to question us on how we do things and why we do it that way. Right? There is a confidence that is often lacking in coaches that come to supervision or to training and that so much imposter syndrome out there at the moment. It's exploding. It's incredible. So many people who ask themselves, who am I to be here? And in my experience, when people have engaged with that kind of journey, thinking about reflecting, questioning their approach and where it's coming from and what's informed by, they don't ask them, they still ask those questions, but they don't have that kind of experience. They seem to show up with a way of being that seems grounded and knowing that where does this come from and what value does it offer? And why can I be confident that it offers value? Which can be theoretical and practical together. So next I have here, transformation as a byproduct, right? Often client transforming can be a byproduct of either coaching or, going to an event, going on a holiday, doing a course, right? Often transformation happens, paradigms shift as a result, as a byproduct of a particular experience or a particular engagement. Now, that's very different when it's an intentional process. And that's also something I got from these conversations, that the coaches I've talked to who specifically create transformation and have thought about their approach and they're grounded in something, it becomes an intentional process aimed at bringing about transformation. And that's different. The result might be similar, but if we want to be transformative coaches, I think it's really important that we have an intentional process, that we have a particular aim and have thought about how does this sort of thing come about. And at this point, I do want to just briefly refer to one of the lectures that Nick gave, and this is what we talked about at more length in our conversation. This is Jack Mazeroff's 3 Levels of Change, an integrated view of it. So I won't say much more in terms of details and getting into how this exactly works. But just to give you an example, that there is a process out there, and there's many of them out there. This is just one example of how does this process of bringing about transformation works, right? And here it starts with a disorienting dilemma, something that challenges how we see the world, something that disorients us, something that makes us feel that we don't quite know what this is and where we are, right? There's a bit of a dilemma. That's the starting point for this particular process of transformation. And it's intentional, right? A coach will take you through a journey like this. And Animas has created a set of principles around this. Again, I won't say much more about this. Nick says it much better than me. But I'm putting this out there just as one example of how it could look like when it's an intentional process, right? So your model may look different. Maybe you are doing the course and it really resonates. Chances are every coach develops their own style of how to bring about transformation. And I think that's important. Who you are is how you coach, is what I often say and tell students. Because how you are authentically, your way of being, your philosophical framework, your what resonates with you in terms of coaching approach and style, techniques, exercises, tools, what you think about coaching is what is going to come up as you are sitting with clients. So I encourage everybody to create your own model, but when you think about what that model might be, and you think about what might be my circular model, or maybe it has a completely different form, what might sit at the center of it? What might it be embedded in? What kind of theoretical lenses really resonated with me from my training? What might I want to look into a little bit more? How else can I expose myself to other ways of thinking or coaching? So I think these things are really important, and they help us grow as coaches. And there's models out there that you can be inspired from, or you create your own one as you learn, as you coach, as you practice, as you reflect on your practice. I mentioned that already. Actually, what I wanted to say about this one is that often transformation does start with this kind of disorienting dilemma, right? It does start with something that has happened that really challenges a person's paradigm, right? So the possibility, the potential for transformation is especially high. And usually those are the clients that show up in our coaching room, is something has happened that shakes them in some way, in their paradigm, in their foundation, in their way that they see the world, in the way that they make sense of themselves in the world with other people, right? How they relate to themselves, how they relate to others, how they relate to work. So that's a fantastic starting point. And that often is the starting point that we meet in the coaching room as bringing about, as having the potential to bring about transformation. And yes, that makes perfect sense, right? Why would somebody come to coaching who hasn't gotten a specific reason to do that? Often it's a pretty sizable investment for someone. So of course, people come when they really feel they need coaching. In my ideal world, everybody would have a coach, and everybody would have a therapist, and everybody would have a mentor, but it's unfortunately not the world we live in, and it's probably quite far away from it. Well, maybe AI takes over, and in the best case scenario, then we'll have a lot more time and a lot more coaches and a lot more money to invest, that everybody could have one. But in the world that we live in currently, most of our coaching clients will need a reason. And most of those who come to see a transformational coach, they often will have that kind of dilemma, that kind of starting point where something has happened that they need to make sense of, right? Somebody needs to transform or feels a desire or a need to transform. Actually, let me bring another slide there, because there is this need to transform. As I'm saying this, and I have a slide on this later, but I think it fits in here quite well. We seem to be in this culture where transformation has become something that everybody should experience, right? I've heard Simon talk about the happiness imperative, and it seems we are moving into a culture of a transformation imperative, that this transformation as this huge thing, which often it doesn't need to be when we look at a paradigm shift, right? It can be a small paradigm shift. It doesn't have to change your whole life. But often it is seen that, we should be transforming. We should be becoming this butterfly. Actually, that works quite well as a segue. That there is this idea that it's important that we become somebody different, better, always optimizing. And I'm critical of that kind of impression. I come from positive psychology as a background into existential coaching. So a lot in positive psychology is colored and influenced, and often positive psychology, the science, is taken and translated in the media as we have to optimize and we all should be happy. And in order to be happy, you'll have to become a different person. So that's potentially harmful, because it puts a lot of people under pressure to change something that maybe doesn't need changing necessarily. Right? Change is inevitable. We're always in the process of becoming, yes. But do we need to be under this kind of pressure to always optimize and always be the best person that we can be? I mean, a lot of coaching is built on the idea that we optimize potential, we maximize potential. We want people to be the best that they can be. And that's an honorable endeavor, right? But if it becomes an imperative, it becomes something that people expect from themselves, then maybe it's helpful to start questioning why. Why do you want to transform? If somebody comes in with a disorienting dilemma, it makes a lot of sense that there's a need. But if somebody comes to you for coaching and they feel a need to transform without necessarily a cause or an event that kind of requires it, never change a running system, or better optimize the system and make it future-proof? Well, I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but I think it's good to ask some questions about it. The other reason I had this slide up is because that in my conversation with Sherry Cutter-Scott, she has been coaching since the early 1970s. So she's been around for some time. We talked a little bit about that butterfly metaphor, and I think Nicky had mentioned as well that in the process of becoming a butterfly, really, this being turns into a messy goo, there's a messy gooey thing inside, and then the butterfly comes to being from that. So the reason I'm telling you this is because it can be really difficult to hold that space. When we talk about this transformation as this huge thing where somebody becomes a different person, and they need to really pull the rug underneath their paradigms, and they find themselves in free flow with just as a nothingness, and then they recreate themselves from that nothingness, right? From this huge mess. That's a lot of responsibility for a coach to hold. Right? So when we talk about that kind of transformation, I always wonder, how far can coaches go? Right? How much are you willing and able to hold a space where someone can become a gooey mess and then redefine themselves from that, become a butterfly? It's a beautiful metaphor, but there's a process there that often I think we're not quite acknowledging. And what I'm saying is that we have a lot of responsibility when we hold space for people who go through huge transformations like that. And it's helpful that we ask ourselves, at what point might our clients be better off working with somebody who may have trained for 10, 20 years, who as therapists train for a long time, and then they have a lot of supervision, they do placement, they step by step learn how to hold somebody in an extremely vulnerable state. And so some parts of transformation require the person to get into that super vulnerable state in order to be able to emerge as a different person. And every coach needs to ask themselves that question: how far am I willing and able to go? And willing and able, they're both very important. And I want to emphasize and underline them. But yes, every ending is a new beginning. And sometimes things end in a very significant way, and then something very significantly new begins. But transformation doesn't have to be that big, right? A paradigm shift can be something very small. Somebody might have a paradigm of, I'm an extremely valuable member to every organization. I'm super well organized and I don't make mistakes. And then they make a mistake. They get a very harsh criticisms. Or maybe I don't have to get fired from a job, but just being set down by the manager and say, hey, you're underperforming. Or, there's feedback that is concerning and you need to change something. So that can shake somebody's paradigm. It might be a small thing for the manager, but that person might go through a process where they really have to question how they see themselves and work on that paradigm. And there's a transformation in there that might not be huge to someone else, but it is a transformation. This was a really interesting one. Mainly this came up in my conversation with Robin Shohead, who's been a supervisor and a therapist for nearly 40 years. The question is here whether we really change, whether we really transform and we take a different form and we change into a different person with a different paradigm, or are we merely peeling back the layers that we had added to who we think we are? Maybe we have reprogrammed ourselves a couple of times too often. Maybe we've listened too well to the messages from other people about how we should be. And then we're just the work of coaching, of transformative coaching, might that be the journey of finding a way back to ourselves? Might we just need to uncover and peel back who we really are underneath all of these layers of who we think we should be, how we think we should be doing things? All of these messages from parents, from the society, advertising, friends, work. So that's a question I'm still exploring, right? I believe in change. But on the other hand, this also makes a lot of sense to me. What does it mean to be really authentic? To what extent can we reprogram ourselves? Can we actually fake it till we make it? If we act consistently in a certain way, do we become that person? If we stop lying, do we become an honest person? If we start lying, do we become a liar? What's underneath? Right? So it's an interesting question when we think about transformation, and when we call ourselves a transformative coach or a transformational coach, I think it's important that we think about what's the end point of transformation. Do we become somebody new, or do we find a way back to ourselves? Butterfly metaphor doesn't work here at all. And I like this, why the rush? I've talked about this a little bit already, right? This was the slide that I mentioned earlier. Why are we in a rush about always to transform? I mean, we live in quite a competitive environment, and it's easy and it's understandable that we feel the pressure to change, especially in this VUCA world, in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, where the speed of development is just nauseating. Right? AI is going to change so much in the next 10 years. I'm pretty sure that we can't possibly imagine the change that we're facing in the next 20. You know, if we think 30 years in the future, it's probably something like comparable to 300 years in the past. And that's huge, right? So in an age where the speed of development is so nauseating and difficult to imagine where we will be, of course, we will have to transform, you know. But then, what does that mean to us? What can we hold on to? What grounds us? The Queen has passed last week. So for many people, it has really shook them, and made sense of why so many people were affected by this, given that nobody knew her. I understand that it means a lot to British identity, for example. Everybody will have their own reasons why they were sad or maybe not affected. But something that I've noticed is that there is this continuity that the Queen represented. She came, she got the crown before my mother was born, and she's nearly 70. So she was always there. There was something that was stable. And now it's not there anymore. Who knows how long Charles will be king? You know, he's already relatively old. So in this age of where new paradigm shifts may be necessary, I think transformative and transformational coaches are more needed than ever before. No wonder the word transformation has come up now, or comes up now, so much more than in the past. Because in the past, change happened much slower, at a much slower rate. So yeah, we will need a lot more of you guys. So go inspire some friends. We will need some transformative coaches because there's just so much change coming, and it will require paradigm shifts, and it will require them more and more often and at a faster rate, which is concerning, because how often can we go through a transformation? Another interesting question. How often can I change my paradigm? Once every decade? Once every couple of years? Once every couple of months? Well, depends on the magnitude of that paradigm and what kind of framework we put around it. But it remains an interesting question for me. And I think we're facing challenging times. So transformation takes place within systems. I talked to Peter Hawkins and I talked to Paul Lawrence, and they're both systemic coaches, both wrote books about systemic coaching. You don't need to be a systemic coach in order to appreciate how important it is to place a client and to place you and your client in relationship within a set of nested systems, right? So when we want to help somebody transform, it's crucial that we explore that to some extent. It seems crucial that we make sense of the person in front of us, or rather help this person in front of us make sense of themselves within nested systems. And this could be within their family, within their circle of friends, within their company, within their community, within their city, country, within their continent, as a member of the human race, within an ecosystem as part of the planet, or as part of the solar system, as part of the universe, right? There's a lot of different systems. And to what extent does my client understand themselves? How do they make sense of themselves within those nested systems? How do they understand their connections? Because if I want to help somebody transform within a particular system, and the system is stacked against the kind of change that they're trying to create, then it's going to be extremely challenging, because somebody might change, but then, within that system, the change just keeps on clashing. How likely is it going to be that this change is going to be maintained? And on the other hand, if we go within the system and we understand what's necessary, then the system that we create, or that we're within, or the system that we choose to be in, can be really conducive to the kind of transformation that we want to create. So some transformation might not be possible depending on the particular system that this person exists in. There's a lot more to say to that, but I just wanted to open that awareness. There's plenty of questions that we can ask to place a client, or help a client place themselves within these systems, and ask for different stakeholders, go 7 generations forth and back, as Peter says. That conversation was really inspiring, to just help somebody take a lot of steps back and really think about past, future, and themselves, not within nested systems only now, but also within, decades of time. There was a wonderful exercise recently at a conference in Iceland. I forgot the guy's name, but he showed a picture of his daughter, who was 10, and his mother, who was, I think, 92 or in her 90s. And he said it's difficult to imagine what it's like, 200 years in the future. But if his mother would whisper his daughter a secret and tell her that when she's in her 90s, to tell it to her granddaughter, that was about 180 years in the future. So we can do exercises as transformative coaches to invite a client to place themselves within time, within space, and within systems. And that often has a huge effect on transformation. It sometimes brings about the need for transformation. And there's another slide that probably is not next, but I'll have it later on. I'll say it now. It's because, do you want your client to transform, or does your client want to transform? Does your client want to transform, or do they need to transform? You can't make anybody change. You can't make anybody transform, is my experience. So it's important that we go with the client, but then also there's a question whether through these kind of exercises that I just described, can we make it more likely to bring about an awareness of a need to transform or enter a paradigm shift? And that's what I discussed and challenged Peter on, right? Coaching is supposed to be client-led. We're supposed to do what the client wants, right? Or at least journey with them towards where they choose to be. And I got the impression from Peter that he said, if that doesn't happen, we talked about climate change. If somebody doesn't care about climate change, then I haven't yet found a way to engage them. And I thought that brings up really interesting questions around coaching being in the service of the client. And Peter just doesn't see it like that. He's not in the service of the client. He wouldn't even call it a client. He would say, well, this is a conversation partner. And he asks, what are you and me together required to do? What's required of us? What's the kind of work we need to do here? And for him, that comes from a much wider system and not from what that person in front of you wants you to help them with. So I thought that was really interesting challenge to how I still see coaching, right? We entering a partnership. But where does the need for transformation come from? Another one is that often transformation does not happen during your session or even during your coaching. Right? I had a client where I thought, oh, well, she had a particular goal and I felt I failed her, right? Because at the end of our 10 hours, she wasn't there. And she was far from where she wanted to be. And I took that to supervision a few times. It really dug at me, right? I'm sure many of us have had clients like that. It's like, oof, I'm not sure if I did a good job there. So then, I think it was a year later. I know she had worked with another coach, actually a coach that I didn't particularly respect in terms of his way of working. But all of a sudden, her career seems to have taken off. And I'm like, fuck. But she wrote to me a couple of months later and said she had given a talk at an event was asked her to give a talk about someone who had really influenced her. And she talked about me. I couldn't believe it. So we had a chat about that. And she said, I couldn't have done the work I've done with that other coach if it wasn't for sowing the seeds, if it wasn't for working on the foundation so that I was able to engage in this next approach, right? It was very different to the kind of work that we have done, but it was needed at the time. And our work was needed at that time. And I didn't see the fruit. I didn't see the tree during our coaching or even long after. And if we hadn't connected or if we weren't connected on social media, I would have never known. So trusting that the work that you do on the foundations and the paradigm shift, the transformational work, it might not be something that you see come to fruition during your session or even during your coaching relationship. Right, I said that. You can't transform people. They need to want to. But then also, there's Peter's challenge to that, right? Maybe we can ask questions that might make someone want to or see the need that this might have to happen. So for me, this is taking a few steps back and offering a level of awareness that might not be my awareness. I can only offer things, right? I can only offer observations or comments or curiosities. But your client needs to want to do that. It's impossible for us to apply a process to someone and make them change. So I won't say much more about that. So there's something about being in relation with other people. Most recently, I had a conversation with Tawana Burrows, a coach from Washington, D.C., about difference, navigating difference, diversity. This is not out on the podcast yet, but it became very, very clear how important it is to be exposed to different ideas and different paradigms, different ways of being. At the same time, our clients tend to choose coaches who are very similar to themselves. And I've certainly noticed that. I'm sure many of you have noticed that the more we put ourselves out there with whatever marketing activity, the more we get clients reach out to us who seem quite similar in values, in beliefs, maybe in looks, maybe in approach, maybe in background or nationality, gender. It's safe. It feels safe to talk to someone who's like you, in thought or in looks, in background or culture or whatever it may be. But I'm not saying that it's better or more effective, but I certainly got a lot from working with coaches who are very different to me, right? So where's that balance? Or maybe we do one and then the other, work with a coach who's very similar and then work with a coach who's very different. Maybe you can be a coach who's similar in some ways and very different in others. How flexible are you as a coach with how you show up in the coaching room, depending on what the client needs? I'm quite cognitive. So whenever I'm a session where the coach invites me to focus on my body, doing some sort of body work, sometimes it just doesn't resonate and it's not helpful. And sometimes it really gets me to a point where I enter a space that I would have not been able to open through my modus operandi. So how do we navigate that? And how can we use that when we are transformative or transformational coaches? Think about how do you market yourself? Think about your profile. Think about your website. To what extent do you invite difference? And to what extent sometimes niching limits the amount of diversity that we can invite, right? But then diversity is also a lot more than that. So Tawana said, well, your about section, about me section, there's so much in there. And your about me section is not, this is my niche, this is about you, right? So how visible is that? And how do you put that out there? Or do you not put that out there in order to attract different clients? My coaching did a major step forward once I did some agency work for a coaching agency in New York, where the profile was minimal. There was very, very little about me. So I just got paired with clients who were very different, who didn't know me as an existential coach. There was a positive psychology edge in there. But I just got exposed to very, very different clients that I would not usually work with. And that really, really helped. And it challenged some of my coaching paradigms. And I was able to challenge some of my clients' paradigms just because I was quite different to who they might have chosen if they knew a lot about me. Nick, do I see that right? Do we have 5 minutes left?
You've got 10 minutes because you started 5 minutes late. Yeah.
Yes. Fantastic. Okay. Good. Well, I talked to Julie Starr, who wrote the coaching manual and also the mentoring manual. She often emphasized how important it is to do your own work, right? Because when we are in relation with someone, and I appreciate not everybody works particularly relationally in a humanistic framework, but we can't help but be in relation. So whether you specifically choose to work that way with everything that entails, or you just, you're trying to do performance work, but you're in relation. If you're doing transformative work, it's inevitable that you bring yourself into the room in some way. And you might try to limit that as much as possible, not to bring your own stuff in. But some people like Robin Shohead, for example, he would say, well, I can only work with what's going on for me, because that's the only thing I have access to. So he would actively bring himself into the room. And that was a fantastic conversation because, he would share that he's angry or frustrated, and that's a bold thing to share. And it feels bold But to him, it doesn't feel bold. It's just that's the only thing he can bring into the room. So why? Obviously, he would. And there's no boldness, there's no courage to it. It's just that's what we're working with. But in order to distinguish if that anger or frustration you're about to voice with a client, whether that's created as you're in relation with your client, or whether that is something, that a frustration that you feel because this client reminds you of your brother or your partner or your kid, my brother and my dad, they always knew everything better than I did. So when a client seems to, gets a bit argumentative or something, or they seem to have this attitude of knowing everything, that stuff gets triggered, right? So it took a bit of my own work to be able to realize that, I'm feeling this way right now because my own stuff is being triggered. This is nothing to do with the client. This is my stuff. Right. So that I would not bring into the room. I would not share with them the frustration I feel right now, or that, I'm getting impatient or angry or whatever it is. So being able to distinguish what that of my experience is worth bringing into the room because it's created here in the here and now in relation to that client and what's going on for them, and what's my own stuff. That's a really, really important distinction to be able to make, and then we're much better able to bring about transformation and bring ourselves into this relationship fully. Talked about that. And Paul Lawrence mentioned multiplicity, right? You might have heard of internal family systems, Richard Schwartz's work. There's other frameworks for multiplicity, but the idea is that the self is not one thing, right? There's multiple selves within you. There's inner dialogues and conversations happening, different parts fighting, some parts protecting you, some parts protecting you that are really no longer relevant because they're formed when you were 4 against a threat that is no longer present, right? So when we think about transformation, which part of you is it? When you want to transform yourself, well, which self is it, right? So exploring a little bit, or at least considering the possibility that there might not be one you, but many yous. And Richard Schwartz talks about a self with a capital S that is, the main self that is kind of in part, as in like, what was that Pixar movie with the little emotions in the big 5 in the brain. I have my issues with that kind of depiction of it. But I think it's quite helpful in many ways to open a door into considering that there might be multiple parts, and maybe only one of those has to transform in order to do what I want to do. Yeah, and don't bury yourself in the process. If we reprogram ourselves too many times, maybe we lose ourselves, and then maybe we have to dig quite a lot later on to find our way back to ourselves. So there's a risk in too much transformation, and you'll probably spot a transformation junkie when they enter your coaching space. Yes, and many roads lead to Rome, right? Many different approaches can lead to transformation. It can be coaching. It can be a particular way of coaching, or a particular style of coaching, a particular process, a particular tool. It can also be a mentoring process, or a teaching process, or a consulting process. Anything can help you shift a paradigm. So there's not necessarily a better or worse way of doing it. Eric Hahn reviewed a lot of research into what is the most effective way of helping somebody. And it's not that therapy is better than coaching. Coaching is better than therapy, or mentoring, consulting, or any subform within that. It's really context specific. So think about what might best serve that client in front of you, and don't be afraid to refer them to somebody else if that seems like a better fit. Good, I think I'm going to leave that there. I mentioned this already in a way. Reinhard Stelter talked about lingering, which I loved, verweilen in German, the being with, the not necessarily pushing for change and transformation, but to be with that person and linger on a particular moment and give them space and room, holding that space for transformation to take place rather than to actively work to bring it about. Again, I can't tell which one is going to be better in a specific context, whether it is to hold space or to get actively in there and challenge and offer exercises and, dig and, peel the onion and use that process that you have, or whether we just need to hold space for transformation to be able to take place, because it's something that often comes quite natural as it's needed and required. So I'll leave you with that question. And I think I'm through with that. I also realized that I haven't actually uploaded the slides yet because I wanted to wait till the last version. And I usually, as I'm listening through other people's talk and workshops, I usually still change a few things. But I will put that in there. So if you take note of that link, then I will upload the slides in about 20 minutes. And here's a couple of other episodes of the podcast. There's lots to follow up on. I'd encourage you to, if you wanted to dive deeper on, I mentioned a lot of these people already, have a little dig. It's worth it. And also, I run a coaching lab every first Tuesday of the month, because we can talk a lot about transformative coaching, but we often don't really see what it's like to do that. What would it look like in the room? And while I'm not sure any of these coaches I put on there would call themselves transformational coaches or transformative coaches, they all bring about transformation in some form or another. So if that's something you're curious about, we get to be a fly in the wall for these sessions and then ask questions. So I'll leave that with you. And if you wanted to connect with me, please do. I'm always really interested to hear from people, because this is to create more conversations. And that's what we want to do with the podcast. That's what we want to do with these kind of talks, with these kind of summits. Talk to each other, because we grow through conversations, and hopefully we can create some transformation or some transformative shifts for your coaching in the process. So thank you very much.